Michael, will you also see it if we raise our hands in the participant thing, or do you prefer us to just butt it with our voice?
I prefer butting in with your voice just like that because I think for the majority of the hand raising, it'll be within the box, so to speak,
Okay.
that I might miss. So if you to be sure that you'll be heard, just speak right up. Feel free to let go of any of your adult social decorum. Okay, so I'll keep the box up here. Okay, so official welcome, how do you do, one and all. This is class number 3, Foundations of Buddhism, where we're going through step by step some of the core foundational ideas, concepts of Buddhism. I admittedly am focusing a little bit more on the early Buddhist side of things. So if you are identified with a particular later school in Buddhism and find yourself unrepresented, my apologies for there. So I'm just, my intention is to look at some of the early teachings of Buddhism and see how a lot of that can apply to the relevance of today. So today, what we're going to be looking at is essentially the ethical structure of the Dharma. You know, a lot of us have come here because of a secular mindfulness or a meditation practice. And I know that was the case for me. I was meditating for well over a decade before I started to look into or see that there is actually a in life, how to engage life practice as well. Um, for me, how should we say, it was interesting because when I came up upon the idea of the Buddhist precepts or the Sila, the ethical practice, it made sense. It's like, oh, of course. Um, but I found that that was much to the byproduct of having a meditation practice for many years, that a lot of these things began to just organically shift and change in me. But I know that's not the case for everybody. A lot of people come to these practices through the ethical side. I know for many years, um, I was working within you know, the overlap of the Buddhist community and the recovery communities, and so there's a lot of people that were coming into recovery through a Buddhist lens, and so you know they're first meeting up with the ethical structure, you know, how to behave. How to get right with their actions in terms of how they're treating themselves and others. And then the meditation came from that. Um, so I thought that this would be a good point for us to look at. I don't know if I said my name. My name is Michael Zittel, um, senior teacher here at Inside LA, and I'm happy to have all of y'all. So let's go to the Blackboard. Let me hide everybody sufficiently. Okay, so let me clear a bunch of these things out here. And every once in a while you hear my crazy cat going nuts. So that's what that sound is. Okay, and present. Very good. Okay, Foundations of Buddhism. Here we go. So the intro to the Eightfold Path and Sila, or the ethical practices. So I believe in our first class, I believe so, that we were going through the Four Noble Truths. Yeah. So the truth of suffering, the truth of understanding the origination of suffering or dukkha, the truth of the cessation of suffering. And the fourth truth is the Eightfold Path. So some of these teachings are matikas, what they say, coming from, you know, sharing the root word for mother, meaning you click on the teaching and it's a drop-down menu of lots of other teachings. You click on them and there are drop-down menus for many other teachings. So they're a mother teaching that just gives birth continuously to other teachings. So the Four Noble Truths is one of those. It's a matikas, one of these, because you click on it and it leads to the Eightfold Path. You click on the Eightfold Path and that leads to a whole series of teachings. So the next 3 classes will be looking at clusters of the Eightfold Path. So today we'll start that journey. So Eightfold Path. So here we have this idea. I want to focus on this idea of a path. So it's like if I'm in point A and I want to get to point B, what's the best route to take? Yeah, so that's all that is meant by this. The path to liberation, the path towards the cessation of suffering. It's how to get from A to B. So I say that because we see in some of this languaging the right view, right intention, right effort. And I know for many Westerners coming to the Eightfold Path, some of them get triggered by that idea of right, because this is right and that is wrong. And maybe some of us have come to mindfulness or some of this Buddhist practices because we might have been turned off from whatever ethical construct that we were brought up in. I know for me, I was brought up in a Irish Catholic household, spent first 16 years of my life in Catholic school. Um, the nuns with their corporal punishment with rulers and rosary beads, and in some cases, children being locked in closets for hours on end. One nun locked a kid in a closet as punishment, and unfortunately, she was going through early stage dementia, and the child was not found till the evening time when the um, janitor came in. So yes, there's a lot. I had good reason to leave my faith of origin early on in life. So that is to say, a lot of us, and this is my experience, obviously my lens, that might come from a Christian view, that might have some kind of, religious-based trauma, or might be turned off it from some of the legalistic, you're going to heaven or you're going to hell. It has to be this way, and there's a very legalistic view sometimes in the Ten Commandments. And so sometimes, when people like myself, who might come to listen to the Eightfold Path, and there's this idea of right and wrong, it's just like, oh man, I came here to get rid of that stuff, man. I don't want to hear that. But I just want to spotlight this idea of right view, right intention, again, is to the path. If I want to go from A to B, this is the right way on the path. So it's just, picturing yourself like just lost on the map. You don't know where you are, and you got to pull over and ask for directions. Hey, what's the right way to get to the highway entrance? Somebody tells you the path, tells you the right way to the path. So that's the idea. Is are we on the path or are we falling off of the path? When we're on the path and we're clear in moving towards liberation, the ease of distress, or when we're falling off the path, then maybe we are inclined to increase our own distress. So I just wanted to put that little asterisk between about this idea of right. So here we are, the Eightfold Path: right view, right intention, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, right livelihood, right speech, right action. That's a whole bunch of words. How do they relate to each other? Well, like I said, over the next few classes. So we're going to chunk them together. This is a way that I like to work with them. Here's this concept of the three trainings model. Now, then people that have just recently finished up the requisites to enlightenment class with me, this is where we ended off. This is looking at the three trainings. So there's this figure here is a stupa. Yeah, so this is a structure that you'll see in a lot of native Buddhist countries. Without going too much into the history of it, all of them have different shapes and sizes to them, but they all have this kind of three-part structure. And there's this idea of a structure. If you're building a home, you don't start with the chimney and the roof, you start with the foundation. So there's this idea of getting the foundation. Once you have the foundation down, then we move naturally up to the next floor. Then we move to the next floor. So the Eightfold Path is chunked into these three sections of Sila, Samadhi, Panya. So those are the three trainings. Sila is the ethical action, or the cultivation of integrity. Samadhi, in this respect, is pointing out the ways of engaging the meditation practices. And Panya, or wisdom, the wisdom that arises as a result. So today I'd like to look at this idea of ethics, or Sila. And so this is the three path factors of right action, right speech, and right livelihood. Yeah. So our right action, that gets into, well, what are we doing? Are we engaging in harm? Are we engaging in ill will? Are we engaging in overly indulging our sensual side to the point where we become fragmented and, how shall we say, disjointed? So, what are the actions that we're taking in this world? That leads into the precepts. So there's the basic foundational, well, precepts, uh, 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 um, ways in which we guide our actions, not necessarily rules, but ways to inform us to act. And I'll be getting a little bit into that. But the sila is right action, right speech, right livelihood. So a lot of us, what is it that we're doing throughout the day? How is it that we are acting and behaving? Are we allowing our anger, fear, sadness to get the better of us, so that when we show up to our family or to our friends or to our significant others, or even the people in the workplace, we're showing up in a way that, we're kind of leaching out some of that sense of aversiveness, or the anxiousness or anxiety. Are we leaching out some of our actions and behaviors that are, um, how shall we say, could isolate us socially, could also be reinforcing a lot of kind of the hindrances. So last class, we are looking at the hindrances of the craving, the aversion, the unconsciousness, restlessness, and doubt. These are some of the underlying forces of discontent, of dukkha. So part of the meditation practice is looking at this. So I think in the meditation practice last week, we're focusing on noting the pleasant, the unpleasant, and the neutral. And then part of that is, how are we relating to it? Oh, here's an unpleasant sensation there. Oh, here's a pleasant sensation there. Well, how are we responding? To the unpleasant, is there's this sense of aversion, this ill will, yuck, get out of here, I don't like that. To the pleasant is there's a sense of craving, I want that, I need that. So we're looking for the arising of the hindrances, and how is it that we can quell them or quantize them. So uh, if we're unconscious to that, to the untrained mind, the hindrances are junking us up, and we are, that can come out in our actions. Yeah, what is it that we're doing? Are we harming people in our actions, in the way that we're doing things? Well, maybe we try to refrain from that a bit. Maybe we try to treat people well, treat animals well, and such. But what about speech? I know for me, that was a difficult one. I was a snarky, sarcastic kid from North Jersey. That was my way of defending myself. Uh, in the neighborhood that I grew up in, I was bullied excessively, daily, in highly uh, uh, um, sadistic and creative ways. They came up with some very interesting things. But the way that I learned to defend myself was through my words. In high school, I was voted most witty, interestingly enough, which means I knew how to make people cry. I knew how to make people cry in a way that was grammatically correct. And I knew how to make people cry in a way that the people around them found to be funny. Um, it's looking at it now, it's wasn't a great thing to do, but it was a survival mechanism for me. Five guys come up to me, and one of them's like, "Hey, buddy, you're going to give me your milk money now." I can't take on five guys, but maybe I can point out something that one guy is highly insecure about, and maybe the guys on the other side of him find that's funny. Maybe I could just play the dozens on that one guy and then fracture that group so that they're not necessarily focused on me, but now they're kind of making fun of each other, and I can sneak away. So for me, harsh, cruel speech was my way to survive. And so that was something that I felt like I really needed to retain and hold on to, because a lot of my identity was around that. And a lot of my kind of survival was around that. So taking on this precept of working with speech, is my speech malicious? Is it unnecessarily harsh? Is engaging in gossip? Um, you know, for me to refrain that, it really took me to some deep levels of introspection of why and how I'm using speech and where it's coming from. So for me, that led to a kind of a path of really coming to terms with a lot of unresolved trauma and feelings of threat that I would carry around in my speech. So our actions and speech, how is it that we can not engage in harm, but have acts and speech that are, well, more life promoting? Yeah. And then also the livelihood. What about our work? So back in the day of early Buddhism, it's just like, yeah, maybe you want to refrain from arms trades, being a butcher, or selling of alcohol. That was pretty much like the jobs that they're saying, maybe don't do that. It's a little bit more difficult today because, yeah, it's you know we are now in this world of so many intricate and overlying laying systems that maybe the job that we're at is perfectly fine. I'm not harming people. I'm just typing into a computer. But then what is that? How is that rippling out into the world? What effect is that having in the world? So, looking at some of these layers of systems, what are our actions doing in the world? And because if for those of us that are not independently wealthy and have to work for a living, um, those aspects of our personality are being called into play. So let's just say, well, for many years for myself, I worked in advertising, which is kind of the opposite. It's, working with doing therapy in Buddhism, it's about, oh, can you just open up and learn to accept yourself? In advertising, it's like, oh, you're absolutely nothing unless you have this product. Yeah? So there was that kind of harm there that I wasn't particularly into. But aside from that, on the day-to-day level, the deadlines and the pressure and the toxicity of the environment was calling into play for me a lot of anxiety, a lot of defensiveness, a lot of resentment. So let's just say, even if your job is kind of some ethical neutral in its impact of the world, still, what's being cultivated in you in order to survive your workday? Yeah? How much of it is the anxiety, resentment, guilt, overwhelm? And how much of it are you actually able to feel like the better parts of you are called into play? Or at least there are room for them, or that you don't have to snuff them or out or hide them in order to exist in that world. So, again, early Buddhism is focusing on one's own personal enlightenment as opposed to what we were seeing in the other schools that we were looking at. Um, the Mahayana schools, oftentimes we sit, we're already awakened and we sit in order to express that. There's this collapsing of the dualism and the duality a lot. So here in early Buddhism, there's not that much of aversion to duality. There's a sense of, um, you know, selves and different selves that we have, and what's being cultivated. Uh, uh, um, what selves are we promoting? What aspects of self are we promoting and cultivating? And what are we trying to refrain from? So a lot of this ethics and sila is about how is it that we can cultivate the aspects of mind and heart that are more oriented towards liberation, towards goodwill, and how is it that we can refrain from some of our habit patterns of suffering. Yeah. So this is the sila piece that I would like to look at. So right action, I was talking about the precepts. So here we have the pancha sila. So for many people that might have gone on different meditation retreats that might be Buddhist oriented, it's customary to open up a lot of them with the taking of the precepts. So over the course of that retreat, you try to refrain from certain behaviors. Some people may take these trainings and try to live by them as their own personal ethical code. But these are considered the 5 basic foundational ethical trainings or precepts. Yeah? So I observe, I observe refraining from killing of any living beings. Yeah? I observe refraining from taking what does the owner not give. That's some odd phrasing there. Sometimes I like the phrasing of, I refrain from taking what is not given freely. Yeah? I observe refraining from committing sexual misconduct. I observe refraining from telling lies. I observe refraining from taking any intoxicant or drug. So for a lot of us, that might be okay. That's reasonable. These are things that we can see in, essentially living the golden rules, some things that are echoed in the 10 Commandments, echoed in, sometimes it's also been echoed as these are things that are in a lot of the Confucian ethical codes, a lot of just humanist codes. There's nothing particularly outstanding or remarkable. But again, for myself, I know my own conditioning, I came to this with this sense of the commandments. I don't like the commandments. Yeah? There's a teacher of mine that I like the way that he phrases it by saying, I enter into the school of learning called not taking of life. I enter into the school of learning called I will not take what is not given to me freely. So that shifts it for me from the thou shalt not, oh, you transgress that, all right, that's another mark on your record. Rather than looking at that transgression of legal codes, it's more of the enter into the school of learning. It suggests, yeah, we're going to screw up. Yeah, we're going to try to do something and we're going to fail. But, this is a mindfulness training. Can we not go to sleep while doing it? If we transgress one of these things, you know what? I just spoke harshly to that dude in a way that really just cut him off at the knees. I totally didn't mean that. I just, foot and mouth disease. I just opened my mouth, stuck my foot in. That felt terrible. There's this sense of, well, can I reflect upon it? What was happening in me? What did that person do that might have triggered some kind of impulse? At what point did my mindfulness kind of fog out and I just kind of went unconscious, and then this habit of biting come out, and then when that was done, how did that feel? And then when that was done, can I notice the repercussions in the other? Can I notice how that the repercussions in myself? Yeah. So it's about, can we be mindful of all of these things? The intention, where we went offline, what was the habit pattern that came out? What was the repercussions, the consequences? Yeah? So it's this enter into the school of learning where it's like, yeah, it's not about being perfect. It's not about doing it perfectly. It's about taking on the intention and seeing how you fall, where you fall, and what you can be supported to move a little further down the line. For me, that made a difference in terms of this being something to grow with. You know? And so I just wanted to just point out these are kind of the foundational precepts that a lot of traditional Buddhists live by, or people that, if they go on a Buddhist oriented retreat, might be asked to take on for the duration of that retreat. Um, Now, then, to reinforce that idea, Thich Nhat Hanh, Vietnamese teacher, very popular. I'm sure most people here are familiar with him. He has a variation on the precepts where it's more the 5 mindfulness trainings. He says these are not commandments or laws in Buddhism. They're more like a flower opening to the sun. So in a way, if we can look at it less as restrictive elements that we need to adhere to because of some law, but more like it's asking us to become mindful of our intentions and actions as they're coming out and made real in the world. And if we can challenge ourselves to refrain from some and promote and cultivate others, we're inclining ourselves a little bit more towards liberation. We're opening ourselves up more towards a liberative experience. If I'm going out and I'm being mean to people, I yell at my neighbor, I come back, I'm just kind of in a bad mood, I brush off my kids, I pick up my cat, I throw her out across the yard, and I go to meditate. What am I going to be feeling? I'm going to be feeling all that yuck and grossness and self-directed disgust, which then, what does that trigger in me? Does that trigger then going offline into fantasy? Does that trigger habit patterns of self-deprecation? Yeah? So my actions influence just, when I come to the cushion, what arises. If I go through the day and I'm trying to work with an intention of being kind, being just, being good, if I'm attempting to use my speech in a way that bridges gaps, that brings healing, that speaks truth, if I'm trying to act righteously and then I come to sit, this feels a lot purer. I feel less burdened by my own tendencies towards chaos and harm. So just because it was Martin Luther King Day recently, and we're talking about Thich Nhat Hanh, just wanted to spotlight, their moments being together. Martin Luther King, nominated Thich Nhat Hanh for Nobel Peace Prize. He was influenced by his work as well. MLK was influenced by Mahatma Gandhi's work, so being able to protest and make a real societal change in a nonviolent fashion. So this was a lot of Thich Nhat Hanh's. He was born into the world of the Vietnam War. So he was experiencing all of the destruction around him from that was taking place at the hand of the American armies. So he comes over to America rather than hating on us. He said, "Okay, these people have a lot of suffering. How is it that we can train to work through this suffering?" So he says here, everyone knows that peace has to begin with oneself, but not many people know how to do it. So what he's done is he's kind of reformulated the uh, um, precepts into the 5 mindfulness trainings. So people that might be familiar with the 5 mindfulness trainings, this is a little bit of an abbreviation, and forgive the notes and the cacophony here, but this was just a picture from a discussion, a group that I led some time ago. So over here on the left, we have the 5 precepts that we just went through. Then over here on the right, we have more of the 5 mindfulness trainings, a little bit of a rewording from Thich Nhat Hanh. So the first one, I refrain from destroying of living creatures, refrain from taking of life. Um, the reframe that Thich Nhat Hanh says is, we train to protect life, to decrease violence in oneself, family, and society. Yeah. So there's um, rather than it all about being the refraining, it's about what's the opposite we can cultivate to protect life, yeah, to decrease the violence in self and family and society. So it's not about like, all right, I'm going to try not to step on bugs and limit my amount of red meat intake. Um, it's about how is it that we can act in a way that makes things feel safer for ourselves, for our family, for society at large. So I think that's especially poignant these days as we're really feeling the fracturing of the fabric of society. Yeah? How is it that we can be the one to work towards mending that? Number 2, refrain from taking what is not given. Essentially, thou shalt not steal. So he has it reworded, taking on the mindfulness training of practicing social justice, practicing generosity, practicing not stealing, and or exploiting other beings. Yeah. So even if I'm not stealing from somebody outright, well, what is it that I am supporting that is exploiting others? So what is it that I am supporting with my wallet or with my vote that is engaging in creating some suffering for others? If other people's integrity or well-being is taken away from them. So there's a slight kind of askance to step up and not just stealing, but protecting people from being exploited and to work towards more of a greater social equity. Number 3, the refraining from sexual misconduct. That's traditionally interpreted as not engaging in sexual harm, the ways that people might manipulate or hurt each other in a lot of um, casual sexual relationships or even within committed relationships. There's a promotion for monogamy, and also, within yourself. How is it that you're cultivating your own relationship with your own sexuality? Is that something that is creating some distress and suffering in your life? And so, if so, that's something to take a look at. Reworded from Thich Nhat Hanh. So, practicing responsible sexual behavior in order to protect individuals, couples, families, and children. You know? So, sexual acts have impacts, impacts on yourself, individuals, and of course, the larger family systems as well. Number 4, refraining from incorrect speech. That is working on refraining from lying, diffisive, abusive, or idle chatter. So number 4 here, he's reworded as practicing deep listening, practicing loving speech, speech that restores communication and reconciliation. So words matter. Words have influence. And as we saw, with the latest thing on Trump's way out, well, yes, what was his words doing there? Was it inciting insurrection? Or was it not? All of these, I don't know, representatives that were trying to block the vote, block the electoral votes, that were saying, oh, we stand against the insurrection that happened. That was horrible. Well, all these guys that are trying to block the electoral votes have been saying since November, the election was stolen. And they're promoting that idea, that concept. And then, of course, it leads to these actions. So words matter. Words have influences on people. So can we practice deep listening rather than just imposing our views on others? Listen. Can our speech be loving and true? Can it restore communication and reconciliation, healing again the fabric of society? Number 5, over here on the precepts, refraining from intoxicating drinks and drugs that lead to carelessness and heedlessness. The way that they have it phrased here is, taken to the mindfulness training of being mindful of our consumption, to help us not bring toxins and poisons into the body and mind. So rather than it just being exclusively, drugs and alcohol that befuddle the mind, what else befuddles the mind? How is your relationship to your phone? How often throughout the day are you on social media? How is that influencing your mind and heart? And what is it that you're taking in? And how is that influencing you? So again, there's this theme of the kind of the radicalization that happened with so much of America through QAnon and all of this. I mean, that the misinformation that is such a huge industry now. What is it that we're listening to? How is that promoting in me a want to hate more, to want to really feeds into my anger more? I'm feeling helpless and confused and left out, marginalized. Well, now I listen to overhear these people that are pointing at somebody else's to be blamed, and I'm feeling now a little bit stronger because I'm angry, and so I'm finding that I'm developing this dependency, this addiction to like hate speech that's happening. This is the radicalization that's happened to so many people these days. So be mindful of our consumption, not just in what we're putting in our bodies, but also what we're putting in our minds, what we're reading, what we're listening to. So I just wanted to put that out there as kind of the old school, the 5 precepts, and kind of a little bit more of a contemporary reviewing. So again, on the Google Classroom, I have a PDF there. If you want to go to the Google Classroom, I have the PDF that has the more detailed writings of the 5 mindfulness trainings for anybody that's interested in exploring that further.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Obviously the precepts are more black and white, and the mindfulness sort of reframe makes it more constructive in a way. I don't know if that's the right word, but it feels like it also leaves room for interpretation in a way that might be counterproductive to someone. For example, say I really should stop shooting up heroin would be a good thing to think, but I'd be mindful of how much heroin I'm, like there could be loopholes is what I'm trying to say. So yeah. Is that a negative, or how would you address that?
That's an excellent point, where it's just like, well, clearly what I'm doing is, I'm just shooting heroin and I'm on death's door right now. So I'm going to look at a harm reduction model. That's what's needed. So there's this idea of within early Buddhism of what is it that we're cultivating? What is it that we can refrain from? And if it's just left to us as the individual, we can find our loopholes. So when we look at some of our less noble habit patterns, when that habit pattern takes root, it has its own ethical structure and is its own wants and its own ways to get what it wants that might be in contrast to the ethical structure that we want to follow. So that inner ambivalence happens oftentimes. So that's why in Buddhism, it seems like within all the schools, there is this, the triple gem, the honoring of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha, okay, there's whether it's honoring the historical figure or honoring your own Buddha nature, your own innate capacity to awaken if we cultivate it. So the Dharma, okay, the paths, the practices, the trainings that we can engage in order to help get us there. And then the Sangha, the community. We don't do this alone.
Mhm.
Right now, us being here together, all sitting and practicing together, that's an expression of Sangha. So the idea is that we can form sanghas, we can form groups of people together that are we're all kind of holding ourselves accountable, and the group is holding us accountable. So maybe I think that I'm doing the precepts just fine, but maybe the people that are around me are like, dude, you're totally slacking over here, and we can all see that it's creating suffering in you, and we're feeling it too. So there's this idea of, yeah, it's best that we practice in community. And maybe that's just, having another friend that you trust. Maybe that's having a teacher. Maybe that's having, a sitting group that you're with, that maybe you um, can talk a little bit more about what your practice is like and what it is you may be struggling with. So there is definitely that sense of being able to take feedback from our community. And I think that feedback from the community is so important. And I really appreciate you asking that question because, you know, there's such a history of these horrible transgressions by teachers, people that for many years, the groups of people are like, wow, this person is just the embodiment of an ideal. And then they just show that they're just deeply, deeply flawed and they've transgressed something horrible. And then the communities fracture. Part of I think what happens is as teachers kind of grow in fame and acclaim, they tend to be surrounded by their yes men and people that just kind of, you know, just let them off the hook. And then the teachers themselves stop taking feedback. And then it's like, yeah, they can be surrounded by all these students and such like that, but they're not in community because they're not taking feedback. So I think that a good, loving, brutal honesty is something that is good for ourselves in community because that helps us stay on the path. Yeah. Does that sound um, relevant or
Yeah,
your question there?
yeah. As opposed to just looking at them in a vacuum and making one's own determination.
Yeah.
Community will provide more perspective and accountability, and help. I guess, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay,
So
absolutely. Yeah, and and just to your example there of somebody's shooting a heroin that's thinking, oh, I'll just cut down a little bit. Well, yeah, so many of the different cultures of communities that are around sobriety. I mean, it's something they talk about frequently. You can't do this alone. You have to do this in community. So that same idea is transposed onto this path too. It's something that's best done in community.
Question, can I
Yeah.
talk? This is Jane.
Okay.
Um, so for the second mindful training, it says practice of social justice, and I just was curious about your opinion on, say one holds value in, say, a certain type of social justice, like gay marriage, and then there's a company that puts money against that, and one could easily not support that company. But then another person can argue, well, you don't know what this so and so that you buy supports and puts their money in. So if you go down that, do you have to
Mm.
be so mindful of everything you purchase to align? It just starts to feel like you're a hypocrite if you don't do all the research to align yourself. I'm just curious where your thoughts are, or and not to abandon the whole concept in general too because you're overwhelmed.
Yeah. Again, that's a good question. And like I was saying before, we exist in so many of these, subsystems of larger systems. And to your point, oh, okay, I'm not going to buy my art supplies from Hobby Lobby because they are against gay marriage. Boom. With my dollar, I'm expressing my expressing my vote like that. But then to your point, yeah, we don't know the certain individuals. Yeah, it gets complex. It does get complex, and it can be extremely overwhelming. Um, and it's, if we were to practice all of these things incredibly perfectly, that would mean that we'd all have to wall ourselves up in a cave and not participate in society. So I go back to this idea of the preface of the I enter into the school of learning called. Yeah. So maybe if the idea is, oh, I would like to kind of help with healing and non-harming, and I'm going to look at the social justice road. Well, in all of the research and the putting of all the things on the board and taking the red string and connecting all of the ideas, if that's just creating anxiety and overwhelm and suffering in you, then maybe there's a different route, because that's going against the I enter into the school of learning called. If it's non-harm, if in the attempt to present and engage socially, that we're working towards a social justice, a social equity, that's creating a lot of like harm within your own experience, then maybe stop and take a look at that a little bit. Where is your own suffering arising? How is it that you can work on that piece? Then pause, and then maybe look at, all right, how can the actions go out into the world? We can do what we can, and I think that different people are called to step up in different ways. So whether that's going out protesting, whether that's getting involved in government, whether that's getting involved in business, whether that's teaching, writing, presenting, organizing, we're all called in different ways. So um, and especially, I mean, working social justice, if you're going out and protesting, I spent many years myself doing a lot of the on the streets protesting, and boy, there's just a lot of suffering that happens there. Out on the streets, being confronted by the opposition, being confronted by the police. There's a lot of rage that can flame up. That's maybe re-triggering our own traumas. Uh, how is it that we can engage in a way where we're not doing harm for ourselves, or in our attempt to right things, we're not creating more harm and discord as well? I don't think that there's an easy answer to that, and I think it's a little bit of a case by case scenario. But it's weighing the sense of your own pursuit towards it. If it's generating more suffering, look at your own inclination of suffering. What's going on there? And then try to continue to move forward in ways that you can engage in better action. That's working towards less suffering kind of out in the world.
Thank you. That's a good way of exploring the concept and allowing myself to think more about moving away from the suffering and how I can pivot to do service that aligns with me without suffering. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. Service, not suffering, for sure. All right. Thank you for the discussion, people. I just want to start to close things off here. This is from the Dveda Vitakka Sutta. Buddha's reflecting upon his years as a spiritual aspirant when he was looking at different types of thinking. Some of the thinking was more inclined towards ill will and sensuality and craving, aversion, restlessness, doubt, all of that. And some of his thoughts were more towards goodwill, towards kindness, towards compassion, towards equity. And so he got into this practice of kind of putting those thoughts in the two different baskets. And one, he would say, all right, I'll refrain from these. In the other basket, I'll try to cultivate these. So here he says, if a monk keeps pursuing and thinking imbued with sensuality, abandoning thinking imbued with renunciation, then their mind is bent by that thinking imbued with sensuality. If a monk keeps pursuing thinking imbued with ill will, abandoning thinking imbued with non-ill will, then their mind is bent by that thinking imbued with ill will. If a monk keeps pursuing thinking imbued with harmfulness, abandoning thinking imbued with harmlessness, then their mind is bent by that thinking imbued with harmfulness. So thoughts matter, intentions matter. And this is a lot of this practice. So there's the actions we're doing for ourselves and the actions we're putting on the world. But again, this idea of entering into this school of learning called, because ultimately preceding our actions is our intentions. And so that's what starts to bridge this outward doing in the world towards the internal mindfulness. Because it's just like, oh, what I'm about to do, I'm feeling the ill will. Okay, let's stop and be with that. You know, oh, I'm doing this right now. You know what? I'm feeling the want to harm. Let's pause and reflect on this. So, and conversely, oh, I'm feeling this sense of love and want to connect. And also, here's this habit pattern of shutting that down. Oh, let's look at that. You know, how so that we can actually promote this want to connect, and let's look at this habit pattern that says shut it down, isolate. Yeah. So this is where, you know, so much of the sila is asking us to go deeper into our own self-reflection. For a lot of us, we might be familiar with the Brahma Viharas. For some of us, that might be new, the metta practice. So we're trying to, a lot of this is about refraining from some of the harm, but how is it that we can push into and cultivate some of these more virtuous mental states? So earlier, I appreciate the check-in where you were mentioning the sense of you know, leaning into working on the unpleasant experience, and that was more fruitful and pragmatic, whereas the working with the pleasant, that feels less constructive. So here's an example of intentionally cultivating the pleasant in ways that are mending for our own healing and mending for some interpersonal healing. So cultivating these particular mind-heart states, you know, there's four of them: kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Yeah. The way that I like to think of it intrapsychically, just me with my own experience, is, well, there's pleasant, there's unpleasant, there's neutral. If I, rather than come, you know, when I sit to meditate, I'm aware of maybe my self-judgment or self-blame or self-doubt. You know, that's kind of a toxic environment. Can I neutralize that, or can I shift that weather pattern inside so that I can just meet these things with kindness? Can I just kind of have this kindness, this resolution to just try to be kind to my own experience? Then eventually something unpleasant arises. Well, rather than having that ill will to say, I hate this, get out of here, well, can that kindness open up and turn towards the unpleasant? In which case, that willingness to feel my own pain, that's an act of self-compassion. If there's something pleasant that arises, you know, rather than craving after or wanting to hold on to it or even dismissing it, my willingness to be kind, open up and turn towards and experience that pleasantness, well, I'm really getting into my own kind of capacity for joy, you know, and building that up in a way that is skillful and wholesome. Yeah? And of course, not necessarily needing or preferring pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, having this willingness to just extend this joyful openness, willingness to open up and turn towards our experience, that's that equanimity. You know, I have no preference in between the pleasant, the unpleasant, neutral. I'm willing to be open and kind towards all of that. That's how we can practice this metta towards self. Traditionally, metta is practiced towards, you know, looking also at others. So there's that interpersonal experience, so that we can bring to mind somebody for whom there's a strong association of metta, of kindness. Oh, I think of my pet. Oh boy, I'm just filled with warm fuzzies. Good. That's your metta helper. You're priming the pump of the heart. And then after that, it's like, all right, we're going to the gym and we're putting on a few plates on the bar to make it a little heavier. Well, can we think of a neutral person and like still have that kindness directed towards them? Yeah? Can we think of somebody that's a little frustrating and recognize that maybe, you know, some of their suffering is, or some of their frustrating presence is because of their own unskillful way of suffering? You know? Can we extend some wish for them to be more at ease? Yeah? So in a way, what we're doing is we're trying to open up our capacity to be open, to mend. You know? And it's interesting what can happen. You know, I remember when I was practicing this for a while, I always find it interesting what happens with the neutral person. I remember being at work and there's this neutral guy, this dude that would show up every once in a while, be like, oh, here's some forms, and he just drop it off in the office to some other guy. I had no idea what his name was. I never even said hello. So I just chose them as the neutral person, and for weeks, that's who my focus was. And I found that I just got really good at sending this individual a lot of kindness, and eventually got to the point I see him in the hallway. I'd be like, "Dude, what's up? What's going on?" And there would be this spontaneous uprising of kindness and goodwill towards the individual. He was probably a little freaked out, but you know, these are ways in which we can repair maybe some of our own ways that we might hide interpersonally, socially. It might be a way that we can begin to work towards healing some resentments. Um, so, you know, I offer to you the metta practice as a way in which we can effectively practice or help with being able to step into some of this more ethical practice in the world. Yeah. So, um, having said that, maybe we can allow ourselves to come to an upright position. We can get in a few minutes of sitting. Yeah. So allow yourself to come to a comfortable upright position. Allow yourself to straighten up and settle in. Settling into the posture of the body. Taking a moment to settle into awareness itself. And sense of brightness, aliveness felt in the mind and or body without overly complicating it. However that means to you, just rest into awareness. We can begin to open up, turn towards the breath. We'll spend a few minutes cultivating shamatha, the calm abiding, cultivating some concentration. So anchoring your attention to a part of the body that's actively engaged in breath, be it the nose, throat, lungs, or belly. Placing your attention here. Right off the bat, how are we responding to this? How are we responding to sitting, to breathing? So in this relationship to this present time awareness here of the breath, can we bring in the sense of kindness? Just trying to get in touch with an intention to be kind. To be kind to our body, to be kind to our mind. Usually both the mind and body tend to misbehave, so rather than judge, Just be kind. Okay, good. So starting off this metta practice, we can bring to mind a loved one, a friend, a benefactor, a mentor, a pet, and someone for whom, when the image of that one arises, there's a natural response of kindness, of affection. So for some people, we can bring that into the seeing space of the mind's eye. Just picture that one. And partial awareness in the general heart space, noticing how that shifts and changes your flavor of the heart. So partial awareness in the seeing of this one, or being aware of them if no images come to mind. Really, once we start to feel that flavor of metta, that kindness and goodwill that arises in our heart mind, just focus on that. How can you appreciate that? Appreciate the pleasant qualities of that. Hey, good. What if we let go of that one and bring to mind a neutral individual? Someone for whom you have no preference towards or against. Maybe a particular coworker or neighbor in the apartment complex, or someone you see walk down the street with some regularity, someone that you might be aware of, but you don't really have any feeling plus or minus towards. And that one be held in your awareness. Doesn't have to be perfect. Now, here's the trick. Can we still cultivate a similar amount of metta, of goodwill, of kindness, and extend it towards them? Sometimes the metta phrase helps. May you be free from harm. May you be free from suffering. May you know happiness. May you know peace. May you be free from harm. May you be free from suffering. May you know happiness. May you know peace. Okay, good. You can let go of the neutral individual. Can you bring to mind someone now that maybe you don't necessarily like? A person that you may have a preference against. Now then, don't bring up the worst human being in your life. Don't bring up your abuser. Don't bring up a traumatizing individual. Just somebody who's a little bit of a challenge. When they come up, you might notice your heart recoil a little bit. And again, maybe this individual's frustrating presentation is a result of their unskillful handling of suffering. Can we wish that this one may too? May they be free from harm and free from suffering. May they know some happiness and some peace. Understandably, this one takes a little more effort. Maybe focusing on a relationship that you would like to bring some healing to. Okay, good. So again, part of this is looking at generating this kindness towards self, towards others. And as it says in the classical texts, like a light bulb, or like a lamp that shines indiscriminately in all directions, can we offer up this loving kindness outwards to all beings in all directions? So extending this metta out in front and behind you, to the left and to the right, above and below, like a light shining in all directions. This desire, may all beings be free from harm, free from suffering. May all beings know happiness, know peace. And recognizing that you are a recipient to everyone here is practicing metta, can you be in a position where you can be open to receive? Take in everyone's wish for you to be free from harm. May you be free from suffering. May you know happiness. May you know peace. Can you take that in? Okay, at ease, everybody. Okay, so the official, thank you so much for all of your participation. I hope that it was of help. I hope it was relevant to your experience. I hope it is of benefit. And so homework. Please, if you want, go to the Google Classroom, check out the material there. I have, again, the 5 mindfulness practices, or 5 mindfulness trainings a la Thich Nhat Hanh, posted there in greater detail. And also take advantage of the YouTube videos for meditation support. And over the course of the next week, can you focus on the theme of metta? Can you leave room for that? Sometimes I like to talk about a 50-50 practice. Leave 50% of your awareness available for out there. Try to keep 50% awareness for yourself, your own subjective experience. Sometimes I refer to that as background practice. So the theme for your background practice, can you cultivate metta towards whatever it is that you're doing? I'm hanging out, I'm doing work, I'm feeling stressed and judging myself. Oh, okay. Can I kind of let that fall away? Can I lean into the self-directed kindness? I'm dealing with a loved one, family member, maybe they're acting in a way that's pressing my buttons. Okay. Can I just kind of calm down some of my reactivity? Can I lean into some forgiveness, some equanimity, some acceptance? And if I'm having a good moment where I'm actually enjoying somebody's company, can I leave room for that? Wow, this is a wonderful moment of connection, of love, and I'm not going to push that away. I'm going to pay attention to this. So that's your homework. Let's end in a dedication of merit. By the merits of these acts and other such virtues, may we attain a liberation for the benefit of all beings. We bow before those who've come before us on the path, and to those who will come after us on the path. Okay, thank you, everybody. Have yourselves a wonderful week. Hope to see you all next Wednesday. Take care.